It's 10 times the terror.
Hello there. Getting old and senile.
Paul, you go ahead and introduce.
Yeah, I'll start off, okay? I got my first Moderna shot, but it's given me kind of a cold, so I've got kind of a raspy voice here, and I have some water in case I need it.
For the radio.
Yeah, right. I said, well, I always said, yeah, people told me I have a good face for radio, you know.
That's right.
Especially for horror.
Yeah, but, right, 10 times the terror. Okay, welcome everyone to 10 times the terror. This is Paul.
And I'm Ralph.
And we are very excited to have with us today one of the leading American actors in the business right now, Shuler Hensley. And we'll be talking to him a little bit about his portrayals of the Frankenstein monster, which ties him in with what we've been doing. In fact, Shuler, we just interviewed Sarah Karloff a few days ago.
Oh, wow.
So there was that. Yeah, but we want to talk about other things as well. Shuler's monster portrayals is only a small part of his career. He won the Tony for the musical Oklahoma, and then did it in London on the West End and won the Olivier Award over there. And didn't you meet the Queen? Did I have that right, Shuler?
Yes, I actually got to meet all the royals at the time. It was Prince Charles, it was the Queen, but what was extraordinary is I got to actually meet the Queen Mum, and it was her 100th birthday when they came to the show.
Wow.
So, yeah, the royals tend to really age well.
Yeah, we just saw it when Prince Philip just passed away at
I know, he's
99.
just shy of his 100th. Yeah.
Yeah, so Shuler has worked with many other key people in the acting establishment, Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman, and is going to be preparing to do The Music Man on Broadway when things get back a little more to what we could call normal. But there's a lot of things to be excited about. So anyway, and I have to add a personal note here that when Shuler and his family were living in Montclair, they were members of the church where I was the pastor, and Shuler sang in a choir, and his wife Paula and their children were very active in the church. So I'm now retired, but those are very fond memories. Shuler, you were very much very supportive of that, and I think even you and Gwendolyn did a duet at one point on one of our gospel music services, if I remember that right.
I think so. Yes, it's funny. I told my kids who basically were really young at the time, and now my daughter's 20 and my son's 16. The first time I actually got them to sing was at Grace Presbyterian Church, and I sort of bribed them, saying, "If you guys sing where I can hear you, I'll give you $1." So they were the loudest children in the choir.
Oh, right. But and I remember we saw you were on Broadway. The last time we saw you was in I always called it Waiting for Godot, but it was called Waiting for Got It. In the recent Broadway, Ian McKellar and Patrick Stewart are both in that with you, and that was a lot of fun too.
Right.
And
it was Ian and Patrick and Billy Crudup.
Yes.
And it was extraordinary to be able to. It was just the four of us doing Waiting for Godot and No Man's Land, which is a Harold Pinter play. We did a double bill for a year.
Yeah. We only got to see the one half of it. But what we called Waiting for Godot, that was something that I spent a lot of time with in college. That was back in the 60s. That was still a groundbreaking play in many ways. And I had a religion professor who said that, the Godot really was God you're waiting for. And anyway, there's a lot of things we can talk about with that. Kind of keep ourselves on track. Just what are you doing right now, Shuler? Just to give us an update on your current current performances?
Well, right now with COVID, seemingly we're getting a hold on that somewhat. Theater over the last year has been pretty much non-existent, and we were scheduled to open a revival of The Music Man on Broadway last October, and then we pushed it, and now we're scheduled to open in February of 2022. It sounds like a science fiction date to me because it sounds so far off, but I think by that time we'll be able to sort of have a handle on it, and on live theater, it's just the audiences and being able to do something like that. But in the meantime, I've been it's given me a lot of time to do film and television, which has become sort of a creative venture too. They've had to rethink how to test people, how to keep people safe on set. They've added an actual COVID department at SAG, at the Screen Actors Guild, that's on set, and I get tested. I'm doing an episode of Prodigal Son right now, and I get tested twice every morning. One is a rapid test, and one is a more thorough test, and they really seem to be able to control it for the film and TV. So that I've been really fortunate to be a part of as well. But it's been a long year for a lot of colleagues and artists, and we're looking forward to getting back on live theater.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that. But as you well know, Shuler, we share our interest in some of the horror and mystery things and Sherlock Holmes and all that. In fact, I think it was Lynn Riggs who wrote the Green Grow the Lilacs. That was the inspiration.
Yes, that's correct.
And wrote the screenplay for the first of the Universal Sherlock Holmes movies, which you saw at our house. I think you'll like
That's right, and I forgot about that. Lynn Riggs, absolutely, yeah. It's I tend to be, because of my voice type. I'm sort of a darker bass baritone. That's where I started in opera, and of course, most of the characters in opera written for my voice type are the villains or the monsters or the evil ones, and I've sort of never gotten out of it being cast like that. But I always find it very interesting to be able to play the monsters and the villains, because I think they're sort of in us all. We all have our own little idea of what a monster and villain are, and we're capable of being that. So
yeah, I mean, so there's a lot we can talk about. Well, let's just jump in with it. So
sure.
As we know, many actors that have played the Frankenstein monster, principally Boris Karloff in the 30s on up to Robert De Niro and many others. And you played the monster, a very interesting interpretation in the film Van Helsing. So tell us about, how did you understand the whole feature of the Frankenstein monster?
Well, it's interesting because I had in researching and getting ready to do that role, even though it was sort of a hodgepodge of monsters. That you had the werewolf, you had Frankenstein's monster, you had Dracula, all in the movie. And I went back to the book, which is quite different from a lot of the way Universal Studios portrayed the monster. And interesting enough, when we started shooting Van Helsing, Stephen Sommers, who directed it and wrote the screenplay, he and I talked about maybe just adding little bits and pieces of nuance, even in the set, where it shows that this isn't just a monster, who grunts and moans, but he's very articulate. He's intelligent. And so
which is the monster in the book. You know, he quotes Milton,
correct.
Paradise Lost, and all of this.
Yes. So we actually, in the cave, the first scene you see the monster, and you have Van Helsing comes into the cave and he sees a pile of bones, and next to the pile of bones is the Bible. So you see, you know, it's like he ate whatever he ate, but he was also a voracious reader, and I thought that was just an interesting sort of representation of it, because you know, I guess what's interesting to me is you can play the monster side, you can play the evil side of these characters, but when it really becomes something that people can relate to is when you give them glimpses of a redeeming quality, or, you know, a glimpse of something that reminds them of themselves. And then that gives weight to the character and makes people think, you know, maybe he isn't all bad, and that's great that I can relate to it, but it's also an example that we all have the capability of becoming monsters.
Yeah, it's sad but true. And in the film, you actually are quoting Psalm 23 at one point.
Yes, correct. And I think that was another thing I asked Stephen Summers, because he had originally written just that he was howling on the table, because I think they were taking him off. There was one of these big elaborate banquets, and they were going to take him off and sort of torture him, because his blood was the secret formula, so to speak, of having eternal life, and that's what they were wanting from the Frankenstein's monster. So as they were taking him off, he was shouting that as well as screaming. But yeah, when you and I first talked about your interest and your, you know, your history with monsters and this sort of subject, it's just fascinating to me that it is a part of everyone's history, and that there's a lot of depth to it, even in a sort of fluffy film like Van Helsing, which is entertaining, but it's an entertaining movie, but these characters obviously have something that grips people, because, you know, Frankenstein's monster, like you said, has been around for so long, and it's still something my kids and I can talk about, and even kids that are even younger than that. You know, I think there was an 8th grade class recently down in Georgia that was reading the Mary Shelley book, and they were fascinated by it. So it's sort of a timeless story.
Yeah, and those the Universal films, and as you know, I'm versed also in the Hammer films. I did a book on Christopher Lee, where
Right.
I mentioned you in the part of the book, part of those the distinguished number of people who played the role of the Frankenstein monster. And people don't always realize, you know, they think of Boris Karloff, but or even just
Yes.
Christopher Lee. But so many people have played that role and played it in different ways. And as you say, that there's a humanity in the so-called monster or
Right.
creature that reflects us, you know, in our sin and in our rebellion, and at the same time in our need.
Right.
So you know, now
Absolutely. And yeah.
Go ahead, Stuart.
No, I was just going to say, and what's interesting when you're literally inside the body of the monster, when you're playing that kind of character, it's not hard to feel what it would feel like to be that kind of grotesque creature that people find frightening by looking at. That you feel isolated, you feel lonely, you feel misunderstood, you want to fit in. It's all the scenarios I think that we all want as a human being, but because of his circumstance and because of the way he looked, it was just impossible for people to accept him, and it really helped inform playing that character.
Now, the Van Helsing film is one pole of this, but of course, then you played the monster on Broadway in the Young Frankenstein, Mel Brooks.
Correct.
Takeoff really on the first three Universal films, which Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and Son of Frankenstein. And I remember when that movie first came out of that. I grew up as you noted, watching those films along with the Sherlock Holmes ones and so forth, and loved them. But I laughed so hard my stomach hurt.
Yeah,
that was so well done. So talk to us a little bit about doing Young Frankenstein.
Well, what's interesting is, Mel Brooks, who is still has one of the most active and active comedic minds still today. I still talk to him as often as I can, and it's got the Mel Brooks humor, but Mel's humor is based on, and he would say this, he would say, you never want to play funny. You want to play it as if you are in the real situation of that. And that's what made the monster, I really didn't have to rethink it and think, oh, this is a cheapened version of the monster. You're still isolated. You're still misunderstood. You can't communicate. This monster couldn't communicate. He sort of was more of he says putting on the Ritz a couple of times and that sort of thing. But it was the same idea, and it felt very much the same in terms of being the odd man out of the scene. But what's interesting with Mel is his humor was that, with all that being said about the monster was the straight guy in the play, because in the musical, because he was surrounded by crazy people. The doctor was crazy, Frau Blucher was crazy, Igor was crazy. They were all insane. So he, in every scene, and the hermit in the hermit's cottage was insane. So it was the twist was that the monster became a straight guy.
That's fascinating. It's funny because real humor is not based on ridicule. Real humor is based on affection.
Yes.
We can relate to the great comedians because we can identify with them. We're not there to make fun of them. We're there to identify with them, and then their troubles become our troubles. So troubles we can recognize, or whether that's the classics, Laurel and Hardy, or Chaplin and the Marx Brothers, or on up to the present. We want to identify with these characters, and then we can see the humor in them.
Right.
But because otherwise, humor can be off-putting.
Yes, I agree. And I always remember Mel during rehearsals would just say, if anyone started doing the wink wink to the audience, or getting used to a certain laugh at a certain time, he's like, don't play the funny, play the reality of the scene. And of course, when you do that, it's even funnier.
One of my observations that come back over and over is he's got a nice smile. Frankenstein has a nice smile when you watch him. I think the best scene for me was in the scene with the blind man where he cannot see Frankenstein, and so they're on neutral ground because Frankenstein accepts him and he accepts Frankenstein, and that is the basis of where their friendship begins. It's only when people see Frankenstein and get upset with the horror of his face that he really gets angry. I mean, when those guys come in, he's willing to receive them as well. But the first thing they do is, it's the monster, and that gets them all uptight. Well, who wouldn't get uptight if everybody that saw us got scared and called us a monster? I mean, it's not the best way to begin a relationship. So for me, Frankenstein is a very tragic figure because he comes into a world with three strikes against him, and there's absolutely no sense of love towards him, other than through that blind man who shows unconditional love. And I think that blind man really represents a sign of Jesus Christ himself, with the lepers or the Samaritan woman, where he just receives them not outwardly, but looks at the heart. And I think at the heart of Frankenstein, the creature I'm talking about, of course, is a gentle heart. He's like a child.
He is. He was born into the world that way. He had no choice, and he had no say in the matter. And I think what's interesting, what I think people, like you say, can relate to that is because as an audience member watching these films and watching the stories that whether it's Young Frankenstein or Boris Karloff, you get an opportunity to see behind the monster in his loneliness, when he's vulnerable, and you instantly go, I can relate to that. And then when he's in a crowd and they react solely on what he looks like, you almost find yourself as an audience member going, whoa, wait, no, he's good, and there's sort of that internal struggle, and I think that's what makes him so endearing and relatable to people.
Did you always have an interest in horror and sci-fi, or did the opportunity create that?
I think my interest is always, as an actor, has always been playing roles that may be preconceived by, for example, Judd Fry in Oklahoma. That's another type of monster or, quote, villain. And when Oklahoma came out, the movie with Rod Steiger, and Shirley Jones, and when it was on Broadway, it was just after the war, World War II. And I think at the time there was a need in society and a need in getting through that you needed a clear hero, and you needed a clear villain. And I think that's where that notion came. But if you read the book, if you read, and if you listen to the song that Judd sings in Rodgers and Hammerstein, which was cut from the movie because Rod Steiger wasn't really a good singer, but it's called Lonely Room. And in that song is a whole exploration of Judd wanting to fit in, wanting to be loved, wanting to be just like everyone else. And from that moment on, I think it created a depth to that character that I found fascinating. Because I do think when I say there's a villain in us all, I don't mean that in terms of we're all going to turn into monsters, but I'm more thinking of it in terms that the monsters are there, but they're also human. There's also that quality that we can relate to. No one is purely a monster. No one is purely, a villain. I don't think. And even studying, I would study the actual psychopath. And the thing about playing somebody that extreme is that they don't sit there thinking, oh, well, I'm evil. They don't sit, they sit there going, I'm right, and everyone else is wrong. It's not I'm wicked, but that's where the dilemma comes from. And I've just found that whole idea fascinating, to be able to go to, sort of explore that as an actor. And my goal would be to find qualities in whatever character I play that people can relate to. Because if you can find one quality that somebody says, oh, well, I get that, or yeah, that's, I've felt that, then you've got them. Then they can't just dismiss you as the villain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. Is there any particular reason why you chose the 23rd Psalm to be the biblical text that the creature quotes?
I just felt like it was. He felt like he was going to his death, and that he wanted to be strong and fear no evil, and that he's I think it just gave him comfort, sort of like a mantra that you do before knowing that something is coming up that's going to be extremely painful, or even you may not come out of.
Yeah, there's a mock crucifixion scene in Bride of Frankenstein, and
Yes.
there are several religious themes in Bride of Frankenstein. The hermit is kind of like a monk. He prays and thanks God for sending him a friend, and he's playing Ave Maria when the monster first comes, and then when the scene fades out, it fades out on a crucifix on the wall. It's interesting to me that Young Frankenstein doesn't go near any of those symbols in terms of the things
Right.
it's picking up. Like Mel Brooks, he really respects that and doesn't try to in any way make that part of the humor, which is well placed in so many other senses.
Right.
But there, I think that these so-called classic horror stories, I always see they're religious allegories.
I think it's interesting, Paul, that in War of the Worlds, you have a minister quoting Psalm 23 as he moves towards the Martians. And there's an interesting catch there, because he takes it to the extreme of saying, I will fear no evil. He just goes right towards them. And but on the positive side, when he says, I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever, that's when he's going to dwell, because it's right there at his execution, so to speak. So I guess in horror films, as in religious themes, there's the two extreme that's carelessly brave or naive, and the other side of the coin is that you're so filled with terror that you don't act on your courage. You just give in to your fear, and so you're just a victim. It's just an interesting playoff to me.
Yeah. I think that's
funny. Looking back on the Van Helsing, I remember, the 23rd Psalm was not written in the script, and it was something that sort of just came to me, that if I was and I was lying on that table for probably 4 hours before we actually filmed, and things were going on around, and you're strapped down, and I think that's just something that is so much of a part of. It's almost like a mantra of being able to steady yourself and feel some sort of peace in those kind of moments.
Yeah, that would fit. How long did it take to put all that makeup on you?
Makeup was about 7 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, so I would come in if I was shooting it, and we usually shot all of my stuff all night. So we'd start around 11 or 12 midnight and end about 5 or 6 before the sun came out, because a lot of it was outside, and we shot it for 3 months in Prague, where I don't know if you guys have ever been to that city, but it's so old and beautiful and wasn't touched by the war, that you can basically hang light, and you've got 700-year-old buildings there. So it was a perfect location for that. And so I'd come in about 5 in the afternoon, and I'd be ready by midnight.
And how much weight were you carrying around in that?
I'm not sure about the weight, but there were probably about 15 different prosthetic pieces for the face and the neck area, and then there was a big body suit, and then there were separate hands that they had to make. And then the interesting thing about my height, I was about 7'3". I'm 6'3" now, but they designed these prosthetic legs where I could fit my feet into, and then the bottom of the prosthetic was actually a very pliable springed foot. And I practiced on those in Central Park, and I always loved the fact that before I went to shoot, I could run around in Central Park on these giant fake legs, and no one would comment because New Yorkers have seen it all. You know, they just like, oh yeah, look at that guy, and that's it. So, but it was what was interesting is it was a sort of a development in the in certain makeup and cooling systems. They actually developed a very simple way of running pipe, like plastic pipe, underneath my bodysuit, and then there was a pump where we could put a giant ice chest next to me, and then it would just pump the ice water through to keep you cool, because you're in that suit for so long that if it's a warm day, it's really hard. And they learned that, I think, from the Planet of the Apes. I believe that was being filmed around the same time as Van Helsing, and they had filmed that in the desert, and they had a lot of issues with guys passing out and from all the giant suits, and they developed these sort of cooling systems, which was very interesting.
Yeah, well, it's all fascinating. Well, this has been great, Shuler. Ralph,
Yeah.
any more questions or comments?
No, I just want to thank you for coming on the show. I mean, you just bring another level of professionalism that and diversity. I mean, I'm just amazed that you've done so many different kinds of parts, and you have that ability, obviously, to do that. A lot of people just can't. They find themselves stuck in one kind of a role, and so you've been very blessed.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, and what I find fascinating about being an actor and being in the arts is that you're constantly being taught life lessons through the art and through the characters. And I would definitely say, coming out of playing Frankenstein's monster, I've learned a lot more about empathy and sort of trying to reach that point where you don't want to judge people, a book by its cover, and you don't want to jump to conclusions. And I think that's a really interesting life lesson that just sort of came to me by playing that role. So there's a lot you can learn from monsters.
Right. You can learn a lot about monsters just going on the Henry Hudson every day.
That's right. That's true.
Well, again, thanks so much, Shuler, and at least
thank you guys. This is a great podcast. I love the concept, and it was a pleasure to share with you guys.
Thank you very much.
Right. Take care. Give our best to your family.
Thank you for listening to
It's 10 times the terror.
the podcast.
You are impossible.
Ralph, you're well-intentioned, but totally wrong. Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's
10xtheterror.com.